for parents and families, for educators and administrators, for school board leaders, and most of all, for our students. As I spent time with my newborn daughter, Clara, at home this past winter, I had time to think about our public schools and staff and teachers who have gone through incredible lengths to keep our schools running as we enter this third year of the pandemic. I also thought about where my daughter would one day go to school and what the future of public education looks like in our state. I had originally planned to give a different speech today, but because of legislative inaction, our districts are facing a school closure ticking time bomb, and it is too important to focus on anything else today but the dire budget cuts facing our district schools. We all agree that we must do everything possible to keep our schools open. But the biggest threat of widespread school closures comes not from the virus, but a school finance relic from 1980, the Aggregate Expenditure limit. In 22 days, public school districts in every county will face enormous and devastating budget cuts if you fail to defuse the ticking time bomb that will force them to close. Without the immediate passage of Senator Marsh's SCR 1022 or Representative Pollock's HCR 2012, district schools will be forced to cut 16% from their budgets, legally unable to spend over $1 billion that you have already allocated to them. Unfortunately, neither of these bills have been assigned to a committee or have received a hearing. For educators and school staff across the state, a 16% reduction in budgets will mean layoffs amid the already crisis-level teacher shortage. It will mean furloughed bus drivers who may never return to their jobs if they are let go now. For students and their parents and guardians, these cuts will mean losing access to academic programs, extracurricular, high-quality teachers, and even school closures. In short, schools will not be able to maintain their current day-to-day operations without action from this body. Let me be perfectly clear. Inaction is not an option, and it's appalling that this was not the first issue addressed when the session started a month ago. Over the last 2 years, I've stood with Republican and Democratic lawmakers alike who have called for in-person learning because we know that schools are where our students learn best, especially our students with disabilities and high needs. Yet the issue of the funding cap has nothing to do with COVID-19, masks, or vaccines. And if schools close because they are not authorized to spend the money that's already sitting in their bank accounts, the blame will lie with you, not our public schools. In total, school districts will lose a combined $1.154 billion. No district will escape unscathed by these cuts. To help us understand what is at stake with these budget cuts, we're going to go back to the classroom on two critical areas, math and civics. And I was told that I can't give out any extra credit. First, Chairman Boyer, thank you for being a teacher. In your legislative district, the Washington Elementary School District would lose over $25 million. I've had the privilege of visiting this district a couple times, and I fear that they will lose the programs that make this district unique. Students who are learning English in the Washington Elementary School District speak nearly 60 different languages, which means that the district needs to retain highly qualified English language teachers and support parent engagement efforts in multiple languages. If their budget is cut, families and children will lose out. And in 2019, Washington Elementary identified over $150 million of needed investments to keep their buildings and systems operating safely and efficiently in the long run. They currently only receive just $3.4 million for capital needs from the state. It's no secret to educators and students that their schools are already underfunded, and it will become even more apparent if these budget cuts are enacted. In Vice Chairman Shope's district, I've had the pleasure of visiting several schools. Superior Unified School District, which in my 2019 visit had recently sacrificed their physical education programs to pay for preschool, they will lose just under $500,000. Further east, led by the 2021 Elsie Tolles Women in Leadership Award recipient, Superintendent Sherry Dorothy, Miami Unified School District will lose nearly $2 million. Cuts to Miami Unified's budget could end or hurt programs like their partnership with ASU, which bring highly qualified teachers into the classroom virtually, or their career and technical education programs where students receive skills that prepare them for careers or further education in the culinary arts, agriculture, business, and more. And while losing the programs will take away student opportunities, losing staff will have an even greater economic impact on this small rural community. The one district that I've yet to visit in Senator Shope's district is Coolidge Elementary School District, where you served as a board member, and thank you so much for your service. Unfortunately, these cuts will also impact your school communities. I know that you have enough experience as a board member to imagine what it would look like to remove $2.9 million from the budget in the remaining weeks of the school year. In Senator Bartow's district, the over 32,000 students in the Deer Valley Unified School District are at risk of losing incredible programs, schools, and teachers due to this looming $36.3 million cut. Deer Valley employs many highly qualified teachers. I worry about what the impact could be to teachers like the 2019 Arizona English Language Teacher of the Year, Eileen Wen. I had the honor of meeting Ms. Wen when she was presented with this award in front of all of her students at Esperanza Elementary School. What does it say to Ms. Wen's students if you cut their school budget in the last quarter of the year? Senator Gonzalez, districts in your district, like Flowing Wells and Tucson Unified, could lose a combined $63.9 million in funding, resulting in cut programs or even school closures. As we know, Tucson Unified serves 47,000 students and is one of the largest districts in the state. The education of those students is at risk. Senator Marsh, thank you also for being a teacher in the Scottsdale Unified School District. At the beginning of this school year, I had the pleasure of welcoming all Scottsdale Unified teachers and staff back to school. Nearly 3,000 employees, including some who have worked at their sites for decades, were present, ready to celebrate a new, exciting school year. Now this district, Scottsdale Unified, which has served students and families in Phoenix, Paradise Valley, Fountain Hills, Tempe, and Scottsdale for more than 123 years, is facing $23 million in needless cuts. While Arizona is a leader in providing parents options when it comes to the education of their children, the solution is not as simple as school choice. While these cuts only impact district schools, our public charter schools would not be able to absorb the students that might lose access to their primary district school if these cuts go through. And as we know, in many communities, the district is the only choice available. Furthermore, Governor Ducey is sitting on not one, but 2 failed voucher programs that only distributed a small portion of their allocated COVID relief funds for private or alternative learning. An indicator that most parents are not all that interested in moving their child from their public school. In Senator Hathothly's district, Round Valley Unified District has served both Springerville and Eager for over 50 years, caring for the education and development of over 1,000 students and their families. This district is set to lose $1.6 million if you fail to act. Budget cuts of this magnitude translate to layoffs, gutted programs, and closed schools. And while some in the Valley may point to public charters or private schools as the solution, the reality in rural Arizona is much different. There are no other public school options in either Eager or Springerville, neither in neighboring St. John's or Vernon. However, the districts that serve both St. John's and Vernon are also set to lose a combined $1.6 million. For these communities in Senator Hathothly's district, the next closest public charter school may be hours away, which can translate to hundreds of miles if families even have the ability and capacity to drop their students off in faraway places like Show Low. But even Show Low, their school district, would also be forced to operate while losing millions of dollars. If Round Valley Unified School District is forced to close even a portion of their classrooms, those students and families will have no other public school choice. And it would reflect an immense failure on the part of the Arizona legislature, too caught up in playing political games in Phoenix to prevent closed schools and layoffs in rural districts. It is hard to overstate how profound the impact of these cuts will be to the educational landscape of rural Arizona, and how they will impact the economic outlook of communities like Springerville and Eager, where districts serve as the major employers. But the impact in urban communities will also not go unnoticed. Majority Leader Gray, you represent many school districts, including my former school in the Peoria Unified School District. They serve more than 36,000 students in 34 elementary schools, 7 high schools, and 1 non-traditional high school. And they would lose just over $43 million, roughly $2,000 less per student. When I taught in Peoria right before my election to state superintendent, my students in special education were surrounded by dedicated, passionate professionals who helped make the best out of situations where more funding would have helped. For example, the Life Skills program taught many students in special education how to do the basic day-to-day. However, when students who were learning English began to exceed the capacity of our school, our district didn't turn them away, citing a lack of funds to build more buildings. They simply got creative, making room for both the life skills and English language learner programs to continue. These services, which are both incredibly needed, were continued to support students' academics. However, they did this with budget stability, a knowledge that they could pay for each of these programs even if they couldn't afford a new classroom. It's not possible to get more creative with administrative and operational expenses when facing a nearly $50 million budget reduction. And I shudder to think what losses my former students will face if these cuts are enacted. And finally, Senator Pace, I promise I didn't forget you. Your current legislative district has the distinction of being home to the biggest public school district in Arizona, Mesa Public Schools. Over 64,500 students attend one of the 6 comprehensive high schools, 9 junior high schools, 50 elementary schools, and 17 choice and success schools in the district. Their schools, teachers, and students are frequently recognized for their outstanding work in education, including the 2021 National Blue Ribbon Schools designation from the U.S. Department of Education for Franklin East Elementary School. Also, the 2020's Arizona School Counselor Association's Counselor of the Year, Jamie Clemens of Edison Elementary School, and the 2019's U.S. Presidential Scholar in Career and Technical Education, Adrian Kwiatkowski of Red Mountain High. However, Mesa will lose $73.8 million if March 1st comes and goes without lawmakers suspending the cap. These are unprecedented cuts, worse than those made during the Great Recession, and they will have a devastating effect on the many Arizona students and families that are served by district schools. Families that do not have time for political games or brinksmanship on this issue. and nor do our students, who are smart enough to know a bad deal when they see one. And while there may be disagreement on whether education funding is currently adequate, you have increased education funding year after year. But this year, your inaction will undo those efforts and harm the students who represent the bright future of our state. Our students can do the math, whether they're wearing masks or not, and they are tired of the legislature playing games with their future, which is exactly what will happen if these cuts go through. And if these cuts happen, our students will lose opportunities to learn a new skill, to follow a new career path, to be taught by a high-quality educator. Students like Felicity Ramirez, who lives in Kearney and attends the Ray Unified School District and is represented by Senator Shope. Last year, Felicity wrote to me advocating for better pay for teachers. In Felicity's words, she said, "Teachers are with us for about 90% of our life as students. They help guide us in our future goals and career paths, beginning with us learning the ABCs and counting to 10. They play a huge role in our lives, and they always want what's best for us as students. I feel it's right for us to fight for them and what they deserve, because they would do the same for us. Considering the pressure on teachers, I feel they deserve higher pay. Teachers go into education with high hopes of making a difference, but instead of thanks, they barely get a livable wage. As a student, I feel our educators deserve better." I couldn't have said it better myself. So students like Felicity will take these cuts for what they are: the continued underfunding and undermining of their education. So, despite all the other important issues related to education, this issue must be addressed above everything else. Suspend the aggregate expenditure limit, let districts keep the money you have already allocated to them, and allow them to get on with the critical business of educating students during this end of this school year. After it has been suspended, I also urge you to pass Representative Pollack's bill, HB 2335, repealing the expenditure limit. It's a relic of the 1980s, when public charters did not exist, and when Arizona's total population for the whole state was smaller than that of Phoenix today. And it unfairly holds districts to a different standard and will continue to hamper their ability to serve their students and families. Like I said earlier, there was going to be a lot of math and civics, which is timely, as both seem to be subjects near and dear to the hearts of lawmakers this session. But whether or not you're ready to grasp the concepts covered today, the unfortunate reality remains. Despite what Governor Ducey said and what you might think, you don't have much time to garner a 2/3 consensus. You have a handful of working days to prevent students and families from waking up to the consequences of political indifference, and failing to act will harm students and families. The money is already in the district bank accounts. You are not adding any new money or raising taxes, just letting them spend all the money that you budgeted to them last year. There is no other choice but to suspend and repeal the cap. And so in closing, my question to you is, can I count on you to vote for a clean fix to keep our schools open before February 28th?
Thank you, Superintendent. Members, any questions for Superintendent Hoffman? I have a question, Superintendent. So thank you for your concern about a future hypothetical. But I'm wondering, what's your understanding about why the state has hit the limit on the aggregate expenditure limit? Like, why are we here?
A couple different factors have gotten us to where we are today, such as changes in enrollment from last year to this year, changes made to Prop 301 money, and that's now classified differently and now counts under, it previously was excluded from the cap and now it's included under that cap. But no matter how we got here, the issue is still extremely urgent and pressing, and Prop 208 has nothing to do with it. It's not, has no part in this calculation whatsoever. So what I'm concerned about is our districts are already meeting with parents, meeting with teachers to plan for what will happen after March 1st. And to me, that seems like we're putting a lot of stress and worry on the shoulders of our school leaders and our communities that is needless.
Yeah, so to drill down into the actual numbers, so you mentioned Prop 301, and that wasn't included being exempted from the limit. It's about $600 million. Is that your understanding, that the legislature, when we continued Prop 301?
Around there.
Yeah, and also additional assistance, several hundred million that we the legislature put into education.
Right.
Also, the 20 by 2020. I mean, is it your understanding that also contributed to the limit?
Any additional funding would have contributed to the limit. However, the limit was set back in 1980, and as I said, that's before our students had iPads. That's, Arizona looked completely different in terms of population. The whole population of Arizona was about 2 million people. We have a lot more kids today, so to me, the aggregate expenditure limit is completely outdated. And I don't think we need it. I think the legislature can be responsible for, on a year-to-year basis, what the budget of the schools should be. That was set last year by the legislature for what the budget should be of state funding, and the districts are counting on that funding. They have budgeted that funding.
So I hear a lot that we need to respect the will of the voters in relation to a few bills that are coming up. So are you suggesting we shouldn't respect the will of the voters in that case, but in other cases? I mean, I'm just wondering when should we respect the will of the voters?
Well, at this point, we need to stay focused on the fact that the legislature set the budget for this school year, and if there's no action taken and the schools lose over $1 billion, we will have school closures in March. And that is unacceptable to me. We need to do everything we can to keep our schools open. It would be devastating for families and our kids if there's any school closures in any community.
And that's fair, but we do have three weeks to work on that. I just wondering, ballpark, since you're bringing up funding, do you have a ballpark idea of what per pupil spending was in pre-recession versus what it is now?
I'd have to get back to you with the exact numbers.
Yeah, so I was pulling up JLBC. They have, the number crunchers. They have good numbers, and in FY 2009, we're looking at per pupil, and this is with inflation adjusted, 8,696, and now we're sitting at 12,371.
Are you suggesting our schools can afford to lose $1 billion this year?
Superintendent, I was just wondering, I was curious your thoughts are just if you knew what the amount of dollars that this legislature has put into public education pre-recession, and then of course having the probably the largest recession vis-a-vis other states in the entire nation, that hit us hard here in Arizona, versus what we're spending today. And the reason that we're in the situation that we are today is because we have put $1 billion ongoing with 20 by 2020. I don't think that should be diminished. I think that was a significant pay raise for teachers. And for the record, I don't give extra credit in my classroom, just so you know. Also, the additional assistance that we put in, and also Prop 301. And so what we hear a lot is, well, we're cutting education. But the reality is the opposite. The reality is the reason why we're at the limit that we are is because we, the legislature, have put so many dollars into K-12 education. One could argue at the detriment to corrections, public safety, other areas of government that desperately need it. In some prisons, we have 50% vacancy rates. I mean, that's a legitimate public safety issue. I'm not suggesting that we can't do both. I think we should focus on what we can do with K-12 and also with Department of Corrections, but I still think it would be helpful for all to at least acknowledge reality, that the reason why we are where we are is because we have put so many dollars into K-12 education.
And so I want to personally thank you for all the investments that have been made up to this date in public education. What I'm saying is to cut $1 billion this spring, this month, would be devastating. It would, again, it would cause, I mean, I don't need to go through my whole speech again, but that's a reality we don't want to have to face. We don't want to even be planning for school closures for the remainder of this school year. We need to be doing everything we can to support our students and the future of our state at this critical point.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions? Yeah, Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you did bring up a lot of the same points that I was considering or thinking about. You run an agency, you have a budget, I'm assuming, and you hold to that budget? No, I'm not in the education industry. I've been a businessman, so I've had a personal budget, I have a business budget. What I don't understand that I would like to have some clarity on is, for a school district, they know what their budget is, and every year there's an increase in that budget, baseline increase, regardless of what we do. And as the chairman said, we have poured in more money. So what I'm trying to understand is, when you're dealing with budgets, and I'll just throw out a flag, this is why I think we should have MBAs running superintendent of schools instead of educational doctorates. But when you know what your budget is going to be, and you know you're going to get an increase, I would imagine that you would, which is what I've had to do, organize around that budget. And again, as the chairman brought up, the pay per student has really gone up. I don't understand how we can have such hand-wringing. And you talked about a relic. It was a vote of the people, as the chairman discussed. It was a vote of the people of Arizona. And you know, as a Republican, we do get hit with, you're disregarding voters. And so that is a little sensitive to me when it's like, well, just override the voters. Well, we get hit with that too much. But I don't know, can you explain how we can have districts that actually get increases, and yet they're saying we can't live within this? Can you explain that to me?
Superintendent.
Thank you. Senator Gray, thank you for the question. So our districts, they are always, every year, tight on their budget. They know what their budget is going into the school year. They budget it. They budget every single dollar, making sure that they're supporting their teachers, supporting students, supporting programs, you know, really trying to attract the talent, just like a business would, really trying to make sure we have a high quality education system with the dollars that they are budgeted. So the issue is that districts knew what their budget was for this school year, and they have planned for that budget. But if we don't suspend the cap, then they will be facing a 16% cut. So they budgeted for their total, the typical budget they expected from a year-to-year basis. They had no reason to think the legislature would not act on their behalf, like in previous years where the cap was suspended, to make sure that they could use all the money that was budgeted to them. So to me, it would be a broken promise, because the legislature did allocate this funding to them for this school year.
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent, a few years ago, I was actually in the governor's office with the budget when he was showing leadership the budget plan, and I waved the flag to say, aren't we approaching the limit? And they said, well, we think we'll be okay, and that was a few years ago. So I knew the limit was there. Most of us knew there was the limit there, and this is basically the education industry's limit. I'm just surprised that there would be some kind of shock to not know, okay, we can only go up to this amount, and so we've got to make sure that we don't go over. And that's why, for me, I'm just, I don't understand the reasoning. I don't have the exact dollars, but the last time I checked, our state budget, we're looking at a little over $14 billion to deal with. That's the revenue that we've got to deal with. The total revenue that K-12 gets from the state, from the feds, from local, is over $16 billion. So I think when we were looking at, you know, the expenditure limit, it's like we're half of the budget. But you know, I don't understand how there can be so much hand-wringing when there should have been a certain amount of, we see this coming, we see this. I mean, to me, I would think that there should have been a little more control over what budgets were. And again, knowing that, you know, we have that expenditure limit coming up that was set there, not because it's a relic, it was set there by a vote of the people of Arizona. So, and you might not be able to answer that, but that's the kind of issue that I have not been able to understand from a budgeting format.
To that point, can I?
I'm going to actually let the superintendent respond, and then you can do it to that point.
Thank you, Chairman Boyer. Senator Gray. So the districts, they didn't know until, you know, after we knew what enrollment was last year to what enrollment is this year, because last year we did have a significant portion of Arizona students that were not enrolled in public schools that we were expecting. So that did factor into this calculation to determine that ultimately that we would need to make the 16% cut. So I do think that this is an issue that it's not that no one was expecting it. I think part of it is not thinking that it would be so significant, but also knowing that the legislature has year after year increased state funding for public education. I think the education community had trust that they would be able to keep the budget that had been budgeted to them last year, and that there wouldn't be, I don't see a need for a $1 billion, over $1.1 billion cut to public education, especially in this time of crisis.
Senator Marsh.
Yeah, just want to clarify a couple things. One, no districts know what other districts are putting forward for their budget. This is an aggregate spending limitation, and we as a body granted it. We gave the schools this money to spend. The voters also, as we're talking about what voters want, the voters also gave us the ability to override the expenditure limitation with a 2/3 vote. And I just wanted to clarify that and make sure that people out in the public are understanding what's going on. We gave the schools the money, period. Full stop. We now are the only ones who can grant them the ability to spend the money that was already appropriated and allocated to them. With that, I'm done. Thank you.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman Boyer. I'd like to echo the sentiment of Senator Marsh. I was going to say some of those points, but instead I would like to thank Superintendent Hoffman for coming and really being explicit as to the students and the people in all our individual school districts. And yes, in my districts that I represent, Sunnyside, Flowing Wells, NFI, $61 million, and in TUSD alone, $56 million, I believe. And it's going to be devastating loss of our economic, people are going to lose jobs, and we're going to have an emergency on unemployment insurance again, like we did last year because of the pandemic, and now it's going to be because we are not getting together to fix this problem that we can very well fix with 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. So I thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, members, we're going to go to the first bill on the agenda, Senate Bill 1246.
Mr. Chair and members, Senate Bill 1246 allows school districts to contract with pre-approved carriers or private parties to provide electric